Shalom from Israel to all of Daystar viewers around the world. I am Moshe Bar Tzvi, the producer of Israel Now News. We at Israel Now News are dedicated to bringing you the full story and the truth about Israel from Israel. It's written in the Holy Bible when David said in Psalm 43:3, "O send out your light and your truth. Let them lead us. Let them bring us to your holy hill and to your tabernacle." And God says in Zechariah 8:31, "I will return to Zion and dwell in the midst of Jerusalem. Jerusalem shall be called the city of truth, the mountain of the Lord of hosts, the holy mountain." Always search for the truth, and the truth shall set you free. John 8:31. I hope you enjoyed the program. God bless you from Jerusalem. Shalom, shalom.
Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Yochanan El-Rom.
And I'm Erin Viner.
In our top story, Israel has severed all ties with the United Nations Human Rights Council. Israel's foreign ministry has released a statement saying that it is cutting off all relations with the UNHRC due to its pronounced anti-Israel bias and a disproportionate focus on Israeli policy towards the Palestinians, while ignoring human rights abuses in Arab nations. Last week alone, the Geneva-based council issued 5 resolutions targeting the Jewish state, despite it being the only democracy in the Middle East. They also voted to send a delegation to Israel on a fact-finding mission to probe Israel's communities in Judea and Samaria and determine their effects on the Palestinians. The United States was the only member nation to vote against the mission. Yigal Palmor, spokesman for the Israeli Foreign Ministry, said the UNHRC has systematically ignored Israel's views and its position. It does not cooperate with Israel on any issue of consequence. Therefore, we have decided, as of today, not to cooperate with the Human Rights Council. Israel's Foreign Minister, Avigdor Lieberman, said that he will convene a meeting of the Foreign Ministry to discuss lobbying the United States and other countries to leave the UN Human Rights Council entirely.
The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that an American family whose son was born in Jerusalem can proceed with their legal battle to have Israel listed as the child's birthplace. Since Israel's establishment in 1948, the State Department has listed only Jerusalem on birth certificates and passports of some 50,000 U.S. citizens born in Israel, while leaving the name of the country blank. Despite earlier dismissals, the Supreme Court has now ordered lower courts to hear the request of Naomi and Ari Zivotofsky to register their 9-year-old son Menachem as being born in Israel. Director of the Anti-Defamation League, Abe Foxman, expressed his appreciation of the ruling and said that the purpose of passports is for identification and not to set or implement foreign policy. Congress passed legislation 1 decade ago to allow the listing of Israel on Americans' birth documents, although the State Department has refused to enforce that law.
The fuel crisis in the Gaza Strip has reached a critical point. Last week, Israel sent an emergency fuel shipment into Gaza, but the shortage is so severe that the last remaining power plant has completely shut down. The crisis began when Hamas, the ruling party in Gaza, chose to smuggle stolen Egyptian fuel across the border rather than purchasing fuel legally from Israel. The smuggling forced Egypt to demand that fuel it exports to Gaza pass through the Israeli-controlled Kerem Shalom crossing on the Egypt-Israeli border. Hamas refused, insisting upon direct trade with Egypt. The dispute led to a stalemate, resulting in the closure of Gaza's sole power plant for the 4th time since mid-February. The situation reflects the tyranny of Hamas over Gaza, whose residents have suffered without heat or electricity throughout this abnormally cold winter. Hamas, of course, blames Israel for the crisis, but the majority of Gaza residents actually hold Hamas accountable. Erin Viner has that story.
Thank you, Yochanan. Yes, despite Hamas efforts and statements from senior Hamas leader Mahmoud al-Zahar that the Israeli Occupation Authority is solely responsible for the fuel shortage in Gaza, a recent poll conducted by the Arab World for Research and Development reveals that 48.4% of residents in the enclave hold their own leaders and not Israel responsible for the energy crisis. The survey also found that Hamas Prime Minister Ismail Haniyeh had a 40.5% negative rating from Gaza residents for his overall performance. And meanwhile, there's also been a disturbing development in the story surrounding the death of Mohammed Halou, the 5-month-old baby who was claimed to be the first casualty of the Gaza fuel crisis. Initial reports stated that the infant, who was born with a fatal lymphatic disorder, died when the generator powering his respirator at the Gaza City hospital ran out of fuel. The Associated Press, however, discovered that the child's death was reported in a small local newspaper written by a family relative days before. The Israeli government spokesman, Mark Regev, said that he was not surprised by the apparent Hamas attempt to alter details of the baby's death and that the case is not an isolated incident, but instead the tip of the iceberg. According to Regev, the authoritarian Hamas regime consistently seeks to manipulate the truth and information allowed to get out of Gaza. Cairo's Al Ahram newspaper is reporting that Egyptian authorities foiled an attempted terror attack against an Israeli naval vessel. According to the report, 2 Iranian agents offered to pay a third individual more than $8 million to carry out the bombing of the Israeli ship as it passed through Egypt's Suez Canal. The development could negatively impact Egyptian and Iranian relations at a time when Egypt is in the midst of major political change.
A controversial new book by a prominent Muslim scholar is drawing fire from women's rights and human rights groups around the world. The book, entitled A Gift for Muslim Couples, is being sold worldwide as a marriage guidebook that deals with the subject of marriage and the after-marriage relationship. However, excerpts of the book have surfaced that call for the abuse and detainment of women. The book tells husbands that they should beat their wives with their hands or with sticks. They should withhold money from them or pull them by their ears. It goes on to say that it might be necessary to restrain your wife with strength or threaten her. In a section that describes the husband's rights, it says that his rights include his wife's inability to leave the house without his permission. The book, which is said to incite men to hit women, has sold out in a Canadian Muslim bookstore and has become a popular purchase online.
U.S. President Barack Obama has warned Iran that the time for a diplomatic resolution to its nuclear program is running short. While speaking at the Hankook University in Seoul, Korea, Obama said that Iranian leaders must understand that there is no escaping the choice before it, and that Tehran must act with the seriousness and sense of urgency that this moment demands.
The brother of the French jihadi terrorist Mohamed Merah has been charged with complicity in 7 murders and 2 attempted murders. The French prosecutor's office said there are serious indications that Abdelkader Merah was an accomplice in carrying out the terrorist crimes. Merah and his wife were arrested last week in connection with the murder of 3 Jewish children and a rabbi at a Jewish school in France. Although Merah denied any involvement in his brother's crimes, he did disclose that he was proud of his brother's killing spree. Mohamed Merah confessed to killing 7 people in cold blood before being shot to death by French police last week. He said that he killed the Jews to avenge the deaths of Palestinian children. Israeli Shin Bet sources have revealed that Merah visited Israel in the year 2010 before traveling to Afghanistan, where he was trained by Islamic militants. U.S. officials have disclosed that American forces in Afghanistan captured, detained, and later released Merah to France in 2010. The 4 Jewish victims of the anti-Semitic terrorist attack in Toulouse were buried last week in Israel. Aaron Viner has more on that story.
30-year-old Rabbi Jonathan Sandler and his 2 sons, 6-year-old Aryeh and 3-year-old Gabriel, were laid to rest in Jerusalem last week, along with 8-year-old Miriam Montenegro. 2,000 Israeli mourners attended the funerals, which were held in the Givat Shaul cemetery. French Foreign Minister Alain Juppé attended the services, after which he said that the blood of both of our nations was spilled in these murders. Your children are being laid to rest in Israel, but their memories will be cherished in the land of France, where they were born. A decision from Israel's foreign ministry facilitated the transfer and burial of the Toulouse victims, paid for out of a fund allocated to those killed in terror attacks. And that concludes the news portion of our show. Please stay tuned for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host Josh Reinstein, and we're here in a beautiful day in Jerusalem on our rooftop studio. My guest today is Professor Robert Wistrich from the Hebrew University, author of A Lethal Obsession. Professor Wistrich, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
Professor Wistrich, there's a big difference between modern anti-Semitism and what we know as traditional anti-Semitism. Can you explain what the difference is?
I think there are three essential differences that we need to take note of. Traditional anti-Semitism before the Holocaust until 1945 primarily had its source in Europe and in Christian Europe from the Middle Ages through the early modern period until the middle of the 20th century. The axis of contemporary anti-Semitism, particularly in the last 40 years or so, has moved. Its center of gravity has passed over to the Islamic world, to the Middle East. And that is the core of contemporary anti-Semitism. The second difference, which I think is also very important, is traditionally anti-Semitism was linked in practice and in people's minds with movements of the radical right, with fascism, with Nazism. And today, its driving force is far more on the radical left. And that is related to the third distinction, which is that the framework of contemporary anti-Semitism is much more in anti-Zionism, hostility and hatred towards Israel, the desire to see its elimination. And that is one of the key aspects of contemporary anti-Semitism.
You know, we hear a lot of people saying today that we're not anti-Semites, we're anti-Zionist. To me, it sounds like the same thing. What is the difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism?
Well, I think that increasingly this is a distinction without a difference. In other words, the fact that people say we are only against Israel and its policies, but we have nothing against Jews, has to be tested in reality. And when you make that reality check, what do you find? That those people who are talking about the dismantlement or the destruction of the state of Israel as a necessary part of any changes in the Middle East or the establishment of a Palestinian state, these people are actually speaking about the elimination in one shape or another of 6 million Jews living in Israel. And these Israeli Jews will certainly do everything to protect, as any other people would, their sovereignty, their lives, the lives of their children, and therefore, in practice, to call for the abolition or annihilation of Israel means that you are consenting to, you're complicit in, or you're active in promoting the genocide of the Jewish people in the state of Israel. That is anti-Semitism in our time.
You know, there was recently an attack in France at a Jewish school, leaving 3 Jewish children dead and a rabbi dead. And immediately people assumed it was Nazis. And of course it was radical Islam. Why is there this disconnect between what modern anti-Semitism is and why radical Islam is really leading that push?
I think there are several things operating here. There is a political element. Because of the size and importance of the 25 to 30 million Muslims living in Europe today, of which at least 6 to 8 million live in France, there's a great reluctance and caution to attribute anything bad, anything that happens which might be regarded with horror by most ordinary people, to attribute it to Islam, because we have seen the consequences when any criticism has been made of Muslims or of the Islamic faith. There have been riots, there's been more violence, there have been extremely fierce responses. So I think there's the element of fear. There is also political correctness. There is the belief that since anti-Semitism is traditionally associated with the right or with neo-Nazis, etc., people want to hang on to this comforting belief, even though there is very little credibility to it. Whereas to actually attribute it to Islamists is something that might oblige people to really take serious measures to protect their own society and their own culture. So I think it's a combination of those two factors.
Professor Wittris, you're the author of the book A Lethal Obsession, which has been wildly popular. Tell us a little bit about the book.
Well, this is a wide-ranging study that tries to place the phenomenon of anti-Semitism, the longest hatred as I've called it, in a historical perspective. So it covers a span of more than 2,000 years. But what I think is distinctive about it is that a third of the book, which means approximately 400 pages, is devoted to the study of contemporary anti-Semitism with special emphasis on the radical Islamic factor, because I believe that this is the element, the game changer, the most dynamic, the most radical, the most destabilizing factor in today's world. And it has many consequences that go far beyond the fate of the Jewish people, or that is a central element in it. It affects the future of Western civilization, of all of humanity, and millions of Muslims who need to know about the terrible things that have been done in the name of their faith, because only they, in the last analysis, can correct this.
There are literally tens of millions of people watching this show. What message would you have for our viewers?
My message would be that we have to take very seriously not only anti-Semitism, but the whole culture of hatred and incitement which has developed in this region, but also exists in other parts of the world. I think we always tend to underestimate the disastrous impact of the preaching of doctrines of hate. We have to face this. We have to develop methods to diffuse this hatred, because we will never have peace, whether it is in the Middle East or in any other part of this globe, until we develop methods, effective methods of dismantling what I call the culture of hatred.
Thank you, Professor Wittris, for being on the show. And thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. Now back to the studio.
Up next, shining light from Israel.
Between March 9th and 14th, terrorists in the Gaza Strip fired over 300 rockets into Israeli territory. One question that continues to resurface is how terrorist organizations obtain the arms necessary to launch such a full-scale attack. What many don't know is that in recent years, Hamas has developed sophisticated smuggling methods, digging networks of secret tunnels under the Gaza-Sinai border in order to provide Gaza with illegal weapons and explosives. In response to these developments, the IDF has created a unit specifically trained for combating this new type of threat. The name of this elite unit is Diamond, known in Hebrew as Yahalom. On a secret military training base, Yahalom is preparing to raid a mock house, outfitted to resemble an actual terrorist smuggling site. And despite its seemingly standard exterior, this is not just another drill. The team will utilize some of the world's most advanced robotic technology, combined with extensive combat training to accomplish their task. To begin, Yahalom uses a robot to detect explosives planted around the exterior of the complex. After detonating the traps, the team moves in to secure the building. Following the firefight, the team then works to secure the smuggling tunnels.
So what you saw is a small demonstration of the methods used to counteract the threat of tunnels and caches. The smuggling tunnels, they are not only used for illegal purposes. I say illegal, I mean drugs and the like. I mean also to smuggle firearms and ammunition inside those through those borders, and that's what they are being used for. We've developed a new kind of methods in the recent years, and what you saw here today in this demonstration is only a few of the methods, some of them that we use today to countermeasure and deal with the threat.
Please stay tuned for ICEJ report from the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem.
What makes the miracles of Jesus even more miraculous? Standing where they happened, in Israel. Come explore Jerusalem, where Jesus opened blind eyes. Visit the hills of Galilee, where Jesus fed the multitude. Stroll through Capernaum, where Jesus lived and taught and healed. To learn more about standing where it all happened in Israel, visit www.goisrael.com. Come visit Israel.
At this time every year, Christians and Jews prepare to celebrate one of the most important festival seasons. For the Jews, the Feast of Passover represents the redemption of the firstborn from death and the liberation of the people of Israel from Egypt. For Christians, this season symbolizes redemption from death, sin, and bondage by the shed blood of Jesus at the cross.
We are here in Jerusalem at the Garden Tomb. Right behind me is the place which symbolizes for millions of Christians around the world that place where that old rugged cross was standing. The event took place here which transformed the lives of millions of believers all over the world. Here, just a few hundred meters from our place, is the Temple Mount. It was 2,000 years ago in Erev Pesach, the evening of the Passover festival. Thousands of Passover lambs have been slaughtered. And exactly at the same time, on Calvary, Jesus was hanging at the cross and dying for the sins of the world. Jesus was our Passover lamb. That's why John the Baptist, when he saw Jesus approaching the river of Jordan, he cried out and said, "Behold, the Lamb of God, which would carry away the sin of the world." It is this message of the cross which symbolizes the core message of our Christian faith. For Paul, it was the central message which he was carrying all over the world. Paul was writing to the church in Corinth. He says, "When I was among you, I was determined to not know anything beside Jesus Christ and Him crucified." Paul understood that the cross of Jesus Christ resembles and symbolizes the power of God which changed the lives of millions of people all around the world. You might ask yourself today, why was it necessary for Jesus, the Son of God, to die such a gruesome death? The answer is simple. God was looking for a family. God wanted to have fellowship with human mankind. Like He had fellowship with Adam and Eve in Garden Eden, He was looking for daughters and sons to fellowship with. And here lays the problem. Our human hearts are not ready for such a noble fellowship.
Our human hearts might be full of good intentions. We want to do good. We want to bless others. We want to be people which like God and also are liked by other people. But there is something in our hearts which constantly drives us to do the things which we actually do not want to do. That's why the prophet of Jeremiah says that our human heart is desperately wicked and deceitful above all things. Who can know it? Nobody has to teach his children to do evil or to be disobedient or even to be rebellious. But it is something which is in our lives from the very beginning.
The Lord looks down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there are any who understand, who seek God. They have all turned aside, they have together become corrupt. There is none who does good, no, not one.
No one is fit to meet the righteous requirements of God. We all have sinned, and each one needs the redemptive work of Jesus Christ. And exactly here comes the power of the cross into action.
He has made you alive together with him, having forgiven you all trespasses, having wiped out the handwriting of requirements that was against us, which was contrary to us, and he has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross.
It is here at the cross where all the righteous requirements of God have been met. A wonderful exchange took place here at Calvary. God's righteousness actually became our own righteousness. And not only that, here we find forgiveness of all our sin, past, present, and even future. And exactly because of that reason, we can enter freely into the presence of God. And this is also what qualifies and makes us able to become part of this heavenly family of God. May the Lord bless you here from Jerusalem.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Yochanan Elrom.
And I'm Erin Viner. Please join us again next week for all your Israel updates.